Health IQ Podcast, Abandoned Wells, Risks to Groundwater and Regulations in New Mexico, with geologist Dr. Kate Ziegler.
Today's episode will be of special interest to anybody with a well. We will be hearing about our groundwater, which is where all of us in Quay County get our drinking water. Our special guest today is Kate Ziegler with Ziegler Geological Consulting. Our crew today is Joyce Runyon and Bobby Hockaday. And joining us at the table is Billy Billingsley, our new Climate and Health Coordinator. And of course, I am Brenda Bishop. Kate, we want to thank you for traveling all the way from Albuquerque today. That can be a long trip some days. One of our contractors mentioned to us at a meeting that you were coming over here to monitor their well to see if it was recharging. And so we were thinking, what an interesting topic to have, because as we said, all of our drinking water is from here. But so thought we should start first with you telling us a little bit about your firm and what you actually do.
So my company is a very small company of geologists and environmental scientists, and we do a couple different things. We do groundwater monitoring in northeastern and eastern New Mexico, as well as southeast Colorado. And we also do paleontology resource work for various construction jobs. So a little bimodal, but that's, yeah. So, and a lot of our work in Quay County has been on understanding the groundwater resources for folks out here.
Which is a really important thing because they are shrinking a little bit from what I hear in the media. Yeah. So when you're looking at people's wells, what kinds of information are you gathering or data that you're getting?
So most of the work that we've been doing has been with Southwest Quay Soil and Water Conservation District, so up on the Caprock. And we gather a couple different kinds of data. We gather water quantity, where we're measuring the depth to water every 6 months in these wells and seeing, how does that water level change versus the bottom of the well. So that's telling you how much water do you have at this moment. And then we also take water samples from time to time to understand water quality out here, as well as potential for recharge, because that's a huge question out here, especially with the drought and use of groundwater, and is it ever going to recharge? So those are sort of the three basic things that we do.
And so how can you tell if a well is recharging?
So we're actually going to put a couple different pieces of data together. We're going to look at over many years, does the water table come up when we have good years, like when we've had good rain or snow, and decline in poor years, or is it always just declining? And then we also look at an isotope of hydrogen called tritium, and it was produced in large quantities back in the 1950s when there was all the atomic bomb testing, but it also occurs naturally in the upper atmosphere. And so the idea is, as rain and snow comes down, it's carrying this tritium molecule with it. And if we see that tritium in the groundwater, it's telling us that that water resource has the ability to receive modern recharge. And if we don't see tritium in that groundwater, then it's older, deeper water that's not recharging. And of course, the fly in the ointment becomes, if we don't have rain or snow, we don't have recharge getting down even into aquifer systems that can recharge. So it's trying to be mindful of all the different ways that water moves on this landscape.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you're talking about that deeper water. I assume that's like really deep well that we would have like 300 feet or 400 feet. How deep would that be?
So sometimes even wells that are only 120, 150 feet to water don't actually get significant recharge. So in thinking not only here in Quay County, but in all of the wells that we monitor, generally the rule of thumb is if the water table is 60 to 70 feet deep and shallower, those are the wells that can get recharge when we get enough rain or snow. That being your scary moment, especially we look at this winter, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't had hardly any precipitation. Wells that are in that 100-foot or deeper to water, generally, not only is it just so far down to that water table that it just takes a long time for those water molecules to get all the way down, But there's also frequently complexity in the geology that means that those water tables are actually isolated to some extent. And so you could pour as much water as you want on that ground, and it may never make its way down to that water table. So it's not as simple as we'd like it to be.
Okay.
Yeah. So as I think about seeing pictures of aquifers, that I've heard that ours is pretty big. But is it deep so that it's harder for people to get to that water? Because I know that there are areas in our county that people have trouble finding water.
So it's a little different whether you're north of the Caprock or you're up on the Caprock. So when we think about groundwater resources, like here in the Tucumcari area, there is a mix of shallow wells that are going to recharge quickly and deeper wells that are in the red beds. And the red beds are a tricky geologic unit to find water in because it's isolated little pockets. And so if you just drill in the wrong place and you don't hit that pocket, you're kind of out of luck. When you get up on the Caprock, you're having a lot of those wells, you're having to drill deeper. Because if you think about that step up, you're having to drill to get down to resources that are going to be deeper than down in the Quay Valley.
Right.
And your geology is a little different when you're up on the Caprock than when you're down here on the floor of the valley. And a common thing that we hear out here is, oh, well, we're all in the Ogallala Aquifer, right? Because that is the aquifer of the High Plains. But really, most of this area, there are little pockets of Ogallala sand and gravel. And that's usually where our center pivot irrigation is. Those are high capacity wells, so you can run a center pivot. But if you think about where we have center pivot farming in eastern New Mexico, it's kind of in these little pockets. You have the farming up at Sedan. You have a little bit here around Tucumcari to San Juan. And then, you go on down, you've got Clovis Portales, down to Hobbs.
Right.
These are little buckets of Ogallala. So everybody else who's livestock or domestic, they're in usually older bedrock aquifers. They're not going to operate the same way as the Ogallala.
Okay.
So it's a lot more complicated.
It is.
Oh, we're all high plains. Great. Or not great, because that aquifer is under an enormous amount of strain. We hear about that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. So, what are some other concerns we have with water quantity in our area? You talk about the Ocklawaga being under strain, but are deep pocket ones as well?
I mean, I would say looking not just at Quay County, but all of the wells that we work with, just about every aquifer that we have is under stress right now. And part of it is you have increasing population, so you have more demand on those resources. We have more demand on our agriculture to produce food for more folks. And the prolonged drought has had a huge impact, not only on our shallow aquifers, but also on our deeper aquifers, because in years when it's really bad, if you don't have pond water or surface water, what do? You run your well more. And so as the drought is prolonged, as temperatures, we have these longer windows of higher temperatures in the summer, and so our surface water is non-existent. We put that stress down onto our aquifer units, whether they're shallow or deep. And so I would say every aquifer resource we have in eastern New Mexico is under tremendous strain these days.
Okay.
Are there threats of running out of water anytime soon, or it just depends?
It kind of depends on where you are. Of course, the one area that we're all very familiar with, being very close to the edge, is Clovis Portales. Right. There are already wells in those communities that are going dry. Portales has been on extreme water restrictions repeatedly. So we know that aquifer, and that's an Ogallala bucket, basically, that those two communities share. And we do know that they're very close to being in dire straits. And we have other communities where we have had wells fail. It depends on where you are and the geology and the use that you're putting those wells to. But I think we're definitely very close to that cliff in a lot of areas out here, which is really distressing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's it's vital for our lives too, but first to be able to live, but also for our farmers and ranchers, it's their livelihoods. I mean, water's it. If your well runs dry and you can't get another one, you can't farm. You can't live there anymore. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty scary thing. So you also talked about quality, and I know that I've heard ever since I moved here that some areas of our county have much harder water than others, but all of us have hard water.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about what we're looking at when we're looking at quality and things like that?
Yeah, so our water quality is going to be related to the aquifer unit that's holding that water. So if we're thinking about a bedrock aquifer, there are minerals in that rock unit, and as water spends more time down there, it dissolves those minerals away. And so depending on what minerals are in that rock unit, you can either have water that's fine the vast majority of the time because there aren't that many minerals to dissolve, or we get units like parts of the red beds where there are lots of minerals that can dissolve. And so the longer groundwater sits down there and dissolves those minerals, the worse the water quality gets. And then we have some units that have a mineral in them called gypsum, which is a calcium sulfate. And as that dissolves into the water, that increases your sulfate levels in your water. And so this is something we hear a lot in the Tucumcari Basin and in the Quay Valley, is folks who have deeper wells that have gotten into rock units that have that sulfate in them. Sulfate's not great for you as a person, but it's really not good for cattle above certain limits. And so you will see something called bovine polioencephalitis, which causes them to go blind and die. And so as sulfate levels increase, as our aquifers diminish, and so the salts concentrate, or you take that water through the well and you put it in a drinker or out in a dirt stock tank, and that evaporates. That will also increase that sulfate level. And so when we take samples for water chemistry, it's watching for things like sulfate, not only for our folks, but for our livestock. Nitrate can be another bad one for humans, especially for very young and very old folks. And sometimes you get accumulations of different metals, like arsenic is one that we see on the caprock. It's naturally occurring. It's not that somebody went and contaminated that aquifer, but different units will have arsenic naturally occurring in them. And then that ends up in your well water. And so then we want to think about, how are you using that water? Should we think about putting a filtration system in place to handle it? And then taking steps from there. So, yeah, so those are some of the quality issues that we're watchful of out here.
When we had our well tested, it was high in, I think it was nitrates. And we don't drink that water, but, the kids every once in a while would, but we always brought in drinking water. But because of that, we thought it was dangerous to have that much nitrate in it. So when you do a water test and you work with the farmer or rancher to say, don't use this for your cattle, or this is what you need to do for your cattle, or what about our plants? Are the sulfates hard on our plants and all?
They can be, depending on the crop type that you're working with. But there are plants that are adapted to sulfates and other salts like alkali saccatone, which is a range grass out here. And so, when we provide data back to a rancher or a farmer, we're going to highlight those analytes that we're concerned about that are elevated. And, most of the time our farmers and ranchers actually know more about the influence of these things on the plants or the livestock than we do. And we have some ranchers who will use that chemistry data to actually balance their supplement tubs, because they'll realize, they're already getting this from the water. So I'm not going to get this type of supplement mix. I'm going to get this other type because they're missing copper, or, what have you. And so we're learning from them just as much as they're learning from us, and we're providing the information so that they can make decisions based on what they know. Because I'm not a farmer or a rancher, so that's their department, and they know that how to integrate that data into what they're doing. So that's a big part of what we're also trying to do.
It's cool. I would not have thought about. I didn't know the supplement tubs came in that many different options to start with. And I guess for those of you who aren't from around here, a supplement tub is a type of feed, I guess you would say, that are put out for the cows to lick and get extra nutrients.
Yep. Yeah.
I have a question about orphaned inactive wells. Are there risks of contamination for those, and is there regulations to have those plugged?
So yeah, that's a nice big tricky question, is dealing with abandoned and orphan wells. There are a lot of abandoned wells out here, wells that were initially drilled shallow and had water, especially back in the 1950s, 1960s when we were first homesteading out here. And they've since gone dry because the water table has just dropped below the bottom, the total depth of the well. Technically, yes, you should be plugging those, in part because you just don't want animals or people to fall down those. And you see these big irrigation wells that you can fit right down one of them. How much that is policed is a tricky thing, in part because the agencies that would oversee that are very understaffed. And so it's hard for somebody like from the state engineer's office to have the time to come out and find all of these wells out here that have been here for, 70, 80 years. Many of them were never registered. The state doesn't know where they are. And so, taking the time to come out and find them and make sure that they're properly sealed off. Most of the ones that we've seen are out in a pasture where I'm not super concerned that something's going to get down in there that's going to introduce something into the water table. It would be if we had an abandoned one near like a shipping pen where you're going to have a lot of animals concentrated and a lot of animal feces and urine, and then that increases your nitrate in those wells. Or if it's near a work area where you've got vehicles where you could have oil leaks and stuff like that. But most of the ones we've dealt with are way out in a pasture. You wouldn't know they were there until you stumbled across them. So, yeah.
Well, that makes me think about the changes in the rules from, I can remember when I first moved here, everybody put their oil out on the ground. And then all of a sudden we weren't able to do that anymore. And that because it was getting into the groundwater. So, and the same way with the monitoring at our landfills and things like that to try to protect that groundwater.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you'd like to let us know? This has been so interesting that we didn't think to ask you.
I think it's just being mindful of your resources, which I think most folks already are. We're aware that, the winters are getting drier, the summer rain patterns are very different now. I think folks are already very aware of that. So just, continuing to be conservative. And, if you need data, to ask for folks to help you gather that. And it's complex under there. So thinking that a neighbor who's 2 miles from you is in the same aquifer and is, stealing your water may not actually be the case at all. Right. And so, being mindful of, the kind of the way we think of it is a lot of our wells are in like a little bathtub, a little pocket of water, and you husband your bathtub. And if you share a bathtub with a neighbor, then y'all should husband it together. But maybe don't always assume that just because they're running their well, they're stealing your water, right. Because whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over, right?
Yeah.
But, being conservative and being mindful of the impacts that things you just don't even think of may be influencing your groundwater.
Yeah. And that conservation, we actually did a podcast about conservation last year, and there's so many things that we can do on our own to just use less water in our homes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, this has been so interesting, but we want to take a moment to share with you a gift for coming.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time and coming over here. I know you probably coming to monitor some wells, but still, it took some time out of your day, and we appreciate that. And we hope that all of you will come back for our next episode of Health IQ Podcast, as we will have another topic of interest to you.
Special thanks to Dr. Kate Ziegler, PhD, Ziegler Geologic Consulting, LLC. Our hosts were Brenda Bishop and Billy Billingsley.
Health IQ Podcast Crew. Our director was Robert F. Hockaday. Our producers are Robert F. Hockaday and Joyce Runyon. Our camera operator, Robert F. Hockaday. Our second camera assistant, Joyce Runyon. This episode was edited by Robert F. Hockaday. Credit music was provided by David Morris. Funding for Health IQ provided by a New Mexico Better Together grant. Brought to you by the Quay County Health Council. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Quay County Health. If you have any content ideas, reach out to us by email, healthiqpodcast@gmail.com. More info about this topic and more available on our Health IQ blog, QCHEALTHCO, UNCIL.org.
This podcast was created solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for advice from a healthcare or mental health professional.